for that young little balls up.
All right, we are live now.
Yes.
Terribly sorry anyone who's tuning into this now.
We were meant to start at 8 o'clock, and we just had a bit of a technical horror show, but alas, we are here.
Yes, it was an awful show. So, to begin anew, welcome everyone. This is an interview with Liam Peterson, who is a specialist in media strategy for M&C Saatchi. And M&C Saatchi Connect. I need to be specific.
Which falls under the M&C Saatchi Able company, and under there, I think there's about eight different companies within the what I like to call the Able stable. So it's a part of a wider network of agencies, M&C Saatchi. And Mike Able was tasked in 2010 with bringing it to SA, and yeah.
Okay, excellent. Now, the work that you do for them is because it's it's fairly sort of modern, up-to-date stuff. Is mostly focused on social media.
That's one aspect of it. But we're also very involved with television, print, out of home. Yeah. So with at Connect, we focus on all of the various touch points, all the media touch points that you could think of. So we'd look at all the various combinations and permutations of media touch points, and then choose the best mix based on the various objectives set by clients.
Okay. Now, I know that you're a big fan of Marshall McLuhan. You're a fan of his particular approaches to understanding how technology influences culture.
Yes.
And so my question mainly here is, we're looking at a country like South Africa where we've seen so many different incidents of marketing being used to manipulate us in political ways. I mean, everyone knows about the Bob Pottinger scandal. And for me, being someone who's fairly conservative in outlook, notice a lot of the usage of media to push certain progressive political agendas, not only in sort of fiction and things like that, but also in marketing, and it's particularly aggressive in the Western world. But to what extent does it shape perspectives amongst advertisers?
Look, my view on this is that since the dawn of man, we've been using these tools, to kind of shape our thoughts, to encourage a certain way of thinking, to express ideas. And we've been using various mediums since the dawn of time to kind of try and capture people's attention, right? So let's go way back and look at cave painting, for instance, right? Then you got basically writing on parchment, but that was only reserved for a select few who had access to those learning institutions and the materials and all of those things. And then you got the printing press. And then in the 20th century, that kind of stuff just hugely accelerated. And it's become more and more obvious to us how powerful these tools are, even more so with digital media and how powerful those tools have been. So when we look at advertising, it's a lot of people have the idea that it's everybody's sitting behind a behind closed doors and kind of thinking, how can we manipulate everybody? How can we? Yes, that is maybe one aspect of people, acting in bad faith and using it for nefarious means. But I think there's also another flip side to it, where it's actually a powerful tool to kind of give light to certain ideas, certain ways of looking at the world, and so yeah, man.
Okay, so typically, if a client is approaching you, when they say something like they'll tell you a very, very detailed perspective of the message that they want to convey. Is there and then you'll mostly sort of point out to them exactly which target market, which population segment is going to be most receptive, or how is that working?
Yeah, it's a very collaborative process, that first part. So understanding what do we actually want to say, what do we actually want our prospective clients or customers to do, and then through that, with the various brands, it's a very collaborative process where we'd actually develop that together. And then the next part will come in, where we actually figure out, okay, cool, who do we need to talk to in order for this message to really hit home? So the whole process is a very collaborative process. It's not like we get a client coming to us saying we need to say A, B, C, and D, and then we go, okay, cool, let's just plug it into that touch point and that touch point and that touch point. I mean, from the get, it's a very collaborative process, which I think is super important, because as advertisers, being in that space, you are privy to a lot of insights, that would actually help you gauge, okay, cool, what is the best message to craft, and why is it the best message to craft, because like my dad and I were having a discussion the other day, and I said to him, I want to be the best in the world in XYZ. He said, no. Instead of framing it as being the best in the world, you should rather frame it as being the best for the world, And I think that little nugget can be translated into the work that good advertisers do in the world, creating messaging that's good for the world, as opposed to creating messages that are best in the world, because creating messages that are best in the world is often chalked up to zero-sum games,
as a competitive mode, as opposed to being contributive or collaborative.
Yes, and then you get certain entities and individuals using the tools for nefarious means, trying to really manipulate people and pull the wool over their eyes.
But I mean, at its basis, advertising is somewhat manipulative. I mean, there's at the most virtuous end, of course, you've got pointing out needs that people have and matching people up, one to the other. There's that gray area between sales and advertising.
The game theorists would frame it as nudging. You want to nudge people in a particular direction.
Yes,
I don't like to use manipulating, because it's almost exclusively used in a negative way. Nudging is probably a better term to use.
Yes, Nudge was an incredibly famous and influential book in political circles, especially recently. And what I've noticed is a lot of the people who are into this sort of global level governance stuff tend to like a Nudge and the Risk Society. Those two books tend to come up over and over again. And so you have this very strange system where people who are into governance and political ideas at a global level, they like these very sort of like fine-tuned, manipulative, psychological analysis stuff. But you and I, as far as this part of the world go, we're more fans of people like Rory Sutherland, who
he's great.
Because instead of having the sort of like these predictive manipulative models, he appeals to people's imagination a lot more, to much more irrational aspects of human nature.
Interesting enough, on that emotional point, who was it again? Sigmund Freud's nephew,
Edward Bernays.
Edward Bernays, yes, he understood this on a deep level. So in the 1920s, I think it was, he noticed, well, I think it was Lucky Strike, one of the cigarette companies.
Yes,
he was trying to capture, he was trying to capture more market share. And you realize that at the time, only men would really smoke in public. It was seen very much as a masculine thing. So what he did was, I think it was in New York, they would have these annual marches or parades. And what he did was he contacted a whole lot of female models, and he had them in public smoking at these parades.
To the suffragette movement,
Yes.
So feminism being a tool of capital for 100 years. It's funny that it's supposed to be female liberation, and yet the number one thing that I think feminism has achieved is tying women ever more strictly to the reins of corporate finance.
They have co-opted it, indeed,
through widespread. And it's funny now, you come across a lot of these young women nowadays who are not so enamored of the whole sort of power feminist, office conquest, be like a man style of living, and kind of want to settle down and have a quieter life at home. Funny how these things turn, but I mean, there's other developments as well. I think the culture of gender and sexuality has been incredibly torrid. I won't even say fluid. I'll just say I'll say torrid for the past couple of generations. And I mean, I one of the big things that comes up from the 1960s, particularly from the sort of advertising perspective, is that whole sort of lifestyle thing. It was very big in the Western world, dividing people into these small little layers of lifestyle about what they're interested in, how they spend their free time, and so on. And one of the things that I find strange is it doesn't seem, I mean, like, while it still sort of maps on a little bit to the Anglos and some of the more sort of liberal urban Afrikaners in South Africa, the lifestyles in South Africa are very different, and the income distributions and the product choices in South Africa, they seem to require a lot more of an innovative perspective. And I don't know if you come across this sort of disconnect where people still have a very Western thinking for how to market to South Africa.
Yeah, 100%. And a gent by the name of Gigi Aylock kind of opened my eyes to the whole
the white Zulu fella.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I came in contact with some of his stuff last year when I was studying at Red and Yellow. And he kind of just opened my eyes up to the whole middle market in SA, and just how vastly different that is to kind of the world that I understood, and it kind of copy pasting and rubber stamping those kind of Western ideas into the SA market often doesn't work, and often falls on deaf ears, So it does require an intense level of ingenuity and very, very careful social listening to really connect with those market segments. And the thing is, like, media is so kind of divided in terms of its consumption. And it's definitely stratified along class lines. So me, for instance, I don't watch much television, if any. actually zero at all. Most of my media is consumed through the internet and various streaming services. So what I'm engaging with and exposed to, what I have been engaging with and being exposed to since like 10 years ago intensely, has been a lot of the stuff that's been generated abroad, particularly in America. You know, so when those kind of ideas are forming the way you perceive the world, and as a marketer, you step into the South African space and wanting to chat to them, often those roads don't meet, you know, and trying to force it. There's a kind of weirdness that kind of arises when you're trying to force it to meet. You know, so that's been my experience personally with regards to kind of looking at what's shaping my mind and my views, and then looking at trying to talk and connect with people who are exposing themselves to stuff that's totally different, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's also different because, like, South Africans, particularly Black South Africans, have a very different sense of humor.
Yes.
I mean, I think the thing is that people miss the sort of dryness and the sarcasm. I mean, this is perhaps an example that's in poor taste for our contentious times. But I was watching, I was watching something with Julius Malema. He was at some press conference, and he was he said something about like using kung fu on the Afrikaners. And like the tone in which he delivered it, I recognized it as like that specific kind of like African dry humor, like particularly from like the northern part of South Africa. There's a specific delivery, and like a lot of people in the comments like didn't catch that it was a joke, and I mean, like, I completely understood it. He was having like having chummy banter with the crowd, and I sort of, like, it's not like I would say I'm extremely fluent in the native cultures of South Africa. I'm still an extremely white fella, but I do notice that there's like a massive cultural gulf, and people don't pick up on the humor or anything. And one of the I'm getting curious about these things sometimes, because there is content that's produced online for a Black audience by sort of Black people on YouTube, and some of it's sort of very sort of clickbaity, attention grabby, but then some of it is like genuinely creative stuff. Like there's an animated series called Noko Mashaba. I don't know if you've come across that one. The Adventures
I haven't. No.
So it's like this petty comedy thing where you've got this sort of wise Alec guy who lives with his uncle, who's like a really crotchety old bastard, and all of it's in Pedi with, like, you know, subtitles, and yeah, very, very, very South African humor, lots of sarcasm, lots of, you know, cynicism, and like the farcical nature of the country and the politics that go on. And it strikes me a lot that they're like these little memes around like how different ethnicities treat each other, and the stereotypes, which are just like totally missed in the polite end of society. You don't talk about some of the different stereotypes, and I think that there's a lot of that could be played off, that people are just ignoring in the sort of corporate world.
But look, I think that is definitely changing. There's definitely an aggressive shift towards understanding how important it is to include all of these voices that have historically been marginalized, you know, in the past. You know, and there has been an obvious gap and gulf in trying to include these voices into the corporate space, so that, you know, more relevant messaging can be developed for the broader South Africa, you know, because obviously, as we both know, prior to '94, it was basically just one like hegemonic idea that was being, well, perspective that was being punted, you know, and then trying to retrofit that to the rest of South Africa. And now there's been some amazing campaigns that have deeply understood all of these little nuances. Look at the work that Nandos has been putting out over the last couple of years. It has a special understanding of essay, you know, and
you know, Nandos has been pretty fucking good with that stuff, actually.
Oh, they've been on point. They've been on point. And I think, do you know what it is? Like marketing in essay, it takes a particular skill, because you're having to, with one message, with one campaign, you're having to appeal to so many different types of individuals and so many different types of cultures. You know, it's like it's like the skilled. When I think of the way Obama delivered his speeches, you know, very, very good orator who could appeal to the masses, and appeal to corporate, and appeal to so many different layers of society simultaneously with one message, you know. And when good advertising in essay has the ability to do that, you know, and it takes special types of, you have to work 10 times harder for your insights in essay than you would, say, in Abu Dhabi or in America, or
because they have templates. They have templates, you know. They can just copy paste certain ideas of what people are there. One of the things that I picked up on about Nandos in particular is that they're a lot braver. They're a lot braver than the other, than pretty much everyone else. Because everyone else just sort of tries to be mellow and not rock the boat, and sometimes that can actually come across as kind of patronizing. I mean, like, I don't know if you remember the old Mac adverts. You remember Mac? MAQ, and like going for that very sort of like cheerful, upbeat tone against the very, very working class background. There's I mean, it's not like people can't be jolly in sort of restricted material circumstances, but I mean, it's a smile that is, you know, considerably forced. Whereas Nandos, I mean,
contrived, and you can feel. Look, people aren't silly. People aren't silly. That's what people must also realize. People are smart. People sniff your bullshit a mile away. You know, and now in today's world more than ever, people will definitely call you out on your bullshit. You know, so being pastiche and being like thinking people are silly, and you're going to force feed them with stupid rhetoric and things that are forced. Like, it's so obvious because we're exposed to so much media, so many vibes, quote unquote, online. So people can suss it out for themselves, you know. So like being authentic in your messaging is critical.
And I mean, it's another one of those things where nowadays, where you're having everything bifurcating into these little groups, particularly online, and you layer that over South Africa, which has all of these, to use an awfully sort of overused academic word, intersections between, you know, race and class and all of these different things. I mean, if you even look at your own life, I mean, you're not exactly what I would call a demographic target for the who could be sitting in a textbook. I mean, you come from a Catholic background. You're a coloured fellow who went to a posh school in Cape Town. So I mean, you've mentioned a few times that sort of elicits from people a sort of, there's like a dissonance between the sort of perception of how you're supposed to be and how you actually are because of that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's not your usual demo, you're not going to find a huge amount of people that's going to fall into that particular category, you know. I mean, like a lot of the online content that I engage with is, from what I understand, very, very different to a lot of people in SA background as well. So when messages that resonate with me are not necessarily going to resonate with a lot of other people, you know, so you're going to have to kind of, yeah, like it's look, a one size fits all doesn't necessarily work. That's for sure. When looking at messaging and targeting and trying to speak to people in an authentic way.
Yeah, I think also there's another aspect of this, which is that if you, in much of the rest of South Africa, you've got these big sort of population groups which will have a lot in common, particularly amongst you know, the black population. They'll be, while they vary a lot, there'll be these big chunks of like a few million people that can form a target market. But when you look at the Cape in particular, things get so hairy and complicated because you've got all of these different bifurcations of religion, class, race, and then, you know, even within the racial group, that you know, the colored racial group, you've got, the way that I sort of think about it is sort of split loyalties, where people think of themselves as closer to blackness or closer to whiteness.
Yes, that's definitely an historic artifact of apartheid, that mentality. I mean, I know we have family friends who have had family that was literally ripped apart due to apartheid, you know, very fair-skinned, colored individuals who, at the moment in time when the Group Areas Act was implemented and stuff, there were family members who actually could pass for colored or white, and literally families split along those lines, you know, disowning their colored family and claiming whiteness.
To get that extra hand on the ladder.
Very hectic, you know? Very hectic, very hectic.
Yeah, and you're getting another version of this now, where you get a lot of colored people who identify with Biko blackness because it's very in. I mean, like I listened to Lester Kivitt recently on Cape Talk, and I was getting a lot of vibes with him where, you know, Biko blackness, you can believe it and still have a normal conversation, but there was this very sort of forced tone that I picked up on, where anytime he's mentioning a colored person, he has to sort of emphasize that this person is actually black, and their resistance to calling themselves black is like an affront to him. And I particularly because, I mean, look, there's been a massive sort of shift since like 2015, when RhodesMustFall became the big thing and everyone started pushing a new cultural revolution amongst the intellectual classes. And I mean, you were also present for that. And I remember some of the conversations getting very ugly about, you know, are you loyal to the revolution or not? And the way that particular use of political blackness became, you know, quite sharp and quite barbed.
No, for sure. You know, in 2015, I actually distanced myself. I was going through some personal stuff that year, so I kind of distanced myself from the whole RhodesMustFall happenings. But the year prior was actually very interesting. In 2014, I was a part of a society at UCT called the Anarchist Collective.
Yes.
Yes, you recall that, yeah. It was an amazing time, actually. It was a very special time. I still regard it as a very, very special time in my young 20s, where we were just, you know, a bunch of philosophy students gathered around a table, studying together. And
no
at the time,
consequences.
we're all very
Yeah.
We were all very idealistic, and we thought we saw all these issues and problems that were plaguing our nation and the world. And then we decided to start the society. And the main aim of the society was to platform various and hone in on various economic and social issues. You know, but with a very anarchist undertone and thrust. And during that whole year of 2014, we spent a lot of time hosting talks and get-togethers where we would platform very radical ideas. You know, I remember there was one talk we had, I'll never forget it. We hosted this talk, Mandela. What is it called? Mandela traitor or
oh, it was like hero or sellout, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes. It is Mandela, hero or sellout. You know, so we had a lot of conversations on that tip. And it was a very, look, a lot of the conversations were extremely robust, and I gained a lot from it. And a lot of people gained a lot from it, but a lot of that kind of, a lot of the language that we were using and that kind of conversation was basically, a lot of it fueled the thrust that came with Rhodes Must Fall, you know, which I found extremely fascinating. And then then things just started moving at that light speed.
Yeah, it was really weird how fast it moved, because I remember when it started out, like, people will tell you now, like, they'll go back and they'll say, oh, we were planning this all along and we were all in on it. And
it is very random.
I remember how it unfolded at the time, and it was kind of comical because, I mean, you knew Peter, you know Peter Peter Humour.
Peter Wood, yes.
Yeah, because he interviewed pretty much everyone. He sat them down for a couple of hours and says, well, where did you first start sympathizing with these radical ideas? And he got these absolutely amazing stories. I heard some of them, and the backstories for some of these characters are hair-raising, absolutely hair-raising, and all of them have everyone's got their own sort of little traumas that found an outlet through politics. And the funny thing about this is that all of the same things that people could have been expressing through different narratives, they chose that narrative. And I always feel that that's part of the reason that it was so appealing, is that we were sold this idea of a heroic revolution, the spontaneous outburst of the people. From like a young age, it's built into the fabric of South African society.
It all started with the Matrix, bruh. All started with the Matrix, my bruh. Red pill or blue pill, you know, reaching for the utopia.
I think the problem is that everyone's selling you red pills these days. You know, like if you go out, you've got people saying, Karl Marx, like. But everything is a conspiracy by capital.
But the fundamental flaw with the Matrix, which is the idea that you could distinguish between the real and the non-real, you know, between the red and the blue pill. You cannot. You can. Who is the gent who wrote that book, Simulacra and Simulation?
Oh, that's Jean Baudrillard. I've got this book that I found in like.
So there's this one scene in the Matrix where Neo gets a knock on the door, and these guys are looking for this counterfeit CD or some illegal data that he had burned onto some disk.
Very archaic format.
But it comes. He whips it out to this book, that Simulacra and Simulation book by that dude. But and a lot of that guy's works is what the Matrix was prefaced on. And interestingly enough, that guy disowned the Wachowskis.
Yeah, because they didn't. His basic point was like completely exactly what you said. You can't tell the difference between the red and the blue.
You can't tell the difference between the red and the blue. And And I think a lot of the revolutionary ideas is based on having that certainty, having that absolute certainty that this is the way to utopia, you know, which I've come to understand to be quite hectically, has hectic consequences. Let me just put it like that, you know.
It's a thing where everyone believes that because they've discovered this answer that gives them a privileged access to reality.
It also affords them the ability to be able to look on other people who aren't in that circle as less than, as NPCs, I would put it, non-playable characters.
Yes,
you know, and it makes it a lot easier to exert violence on those individuals because they're not really awake. They're not fully human. You know, and it's easy for these individuals to either be discarded or cut off or cancelled, and it's a very violent way of looking at the world. I find you're almost dehumanizing people on a certain level because you're now in the matrix, you're awake, right, and you're seeing all these automatons, these NPCs who are either shilling for the other side or agents of the system, or they are part of your group who are fighting for the cause. You know, it creates a very dichotomous situation where the ability to dialogue disappears. You know, the ability to dialogue totally disappears, which I think is extremely dangerous, and it's basically the world that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember when I first started getting, you'd come across it in some of the course readings. You'd come across some of these like critical theory ideas and things like that. And you just sort of, you sort of breeze past them because not everything that you read is taken all that seriously. But there comes a point, there came a point where I started seeing people use these as sort of like, almost like spiritual warfare, where you'd be having a conversation with someone, you'd be trying to plead with them just to sort of see you as a human being and say, hey, I'm concerned about this. I'm worried that's an issue. I'm worried this is an issue. And they'll come to you and they'll be like, no, but because you're this, you can't see anything. So you've just got to do as I tell you.
People have confused opinion with character, you know. Yeah. So they've kind of, you know, look, opinions change, people change, right? You know, you can change teams, like it happens. Like my position on things is never fixed. If I'm presented with something new, I will always try my best to readjust my perspective on things. You know, but nowadays you either red or you blue, in or out. You know, it's a very dichotomous situation, which makes me very angry.
It's hard to step back because some of the things that occurred during that cultural moment that we're now seeing flooding the whole country.
Oh yeah, it's a plague. But, yeah. But the thing is, here in SA, a lot of the stuff has been rubber stamped from the US.
Yeah,
almost all of it. I mean, Malema is a case in point. That man has no political imagination whatsoever. He like almost every political idea that he holds is Western.
Yeah.
You know, or like all of it.
Yeah, so
you know, and he's wanting to repurpose that for his own populist agenda. It's tired tropes that he's just redressing.
I know, and you saw it already in China when China got hold of it, and you thought, well, you know, China's this different civilization. When they encounter Western ideas, it just won't work. But then you see how quickly Mao used Leninism to completely just tear up the whole heritage of his society by the roots. You're seeing this in South Africa to some extent. It happened quite slowly in the democratic era, where you see, I mean, urbanization is a part of it, and there's certainly a lot of black people who manage to preserve to some degree their roots. But I think it's becoming increasingly a privileged position to be able to do so, because ordinary people, very conscious Carrickle just made a funny remark, said, Malema is possessed by the demon summoned by white men in the 1800s. I mean, this is the thing.
You know what's fascinating? Because Marshall McLuhan, I was actually listening to an old talk in 1977, where Marshall McLuhan was saying that the people who are most susceptible to being ideologically possessed or manipulated are people who are literate.
Yes, that's
because you can persuade illiterate people with money and trinkets, but it'll only get you so far. But to actually really, really ideologically possess people so that they form the symbols in their mind, they have to be, it's easier to do it when they're literate because there are more plug points to plug into.
And also it's because you've taught someone to see the world through ideas. So when you've got someone like you or me we've learned to look at the world as through an intellectual lens. We understand everything in terms of these high-level abstractions, and they're how you make sense of your social environment. And so the emotional salience of every one of these big ideas that you're using every day in order to signal your status or anything like that, it becomes, because of that emotional salience, I think these are things that are very easily tugged one way or the other. And I mean, to bring this back to marketing, I mean, you remember the impact of Bell Pottinger, which came, just before RhodesMustFall, and how quickly white monopoly capital became a major talking point amongst the fallists.
Yeah. That's look. I do, when it comes to white monopoly capital, I think there definitely the needle still needs to shift. There still needs to be a rebalancing for sure, right? But the way it's framed, there needs to be exceptional care with the way that issue is framed and positioned, because it's a minority who have control over the economy and invariably are blamed for all of these social ills. That's a lot of familiarity with Rwanda and the like. With the way they were framing stuff back then, Germany as well back in the D. So I think it is an issue that needs to be addressed, but the framing is except you need to be extremely delicate with the framing of that, because then you just start creating demons. People just start seeing you as demons, and one does not negotiate with demons or the devil.
Yeah, I mean, everyone understands that sort of little heuristic. I think it's very natural. And I think part of the problem is we've gotten to this point where we've been told, we've been brought up on almost like a hive mind theory of race. I mean, I mean, you keep thinking about the way that they use the language of consciousness, of race consciousness. I mean, this is the thing that sort of drove the Nazis to what they did, or at least drove a lot of their ideological content, was the idea of race consciousness. And then, of course, funnily enough, it migrated over to Black America during the late 19th century.
Do you know what's particularly worrying when it comes to that stuff, right? Is that on the one hand, we have this huge global move towards this one homogenous idea, the global village, right? And then on the other hand, we have stuff like the race consciousness, right? And for me, I kind of get the sense that it's creating so much friction, because now everybody, you have those particular interest groups of individuals who are wanting their culture and their identity to be the thing, you know, in that pursuit of that global hegemonic kind of overarching culture, you know, which is extremely worrying, you know. So you have these two forces playing at hand, but that's almost who can get there first type of thing, and they'll kill and destroy everything else in their wake, you know. So you have this huge, all these tensions now pulling at each other, tugging at each other on either side.
Yeah, I mean, you watch these things playing out in the United Nations when they choose who to sanction and, you know, who to empower, and, you know, whose resolutions to promote. You know,
but the United Nations almost they've achieved the level that supersedes the nation states. They supersede that now.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was the. I mean, we all know
moral authority.
Yeah, we know that was the goal from the first point, and people sort of instinctively now, without even thinking about this, appeal to international law as if the United Nations is a politically neutral entity. No. You know, it isn't. It's like people who believe in South Africa by default, without questioning, you know, what our current dispensation is based on, what its end goals are. And it doesn't strike me as something that is that works for people, because they'll repeat a lot of the phrases they know are sort of right, and there will always be like that little bit of a clash with what they really want or need in the meantime, and so you start getting people picking and choosing different parts of the value system that we're supposed to all adhere to.
No, it's an interesting situation, but I think more now than ever there needs to be a collective effort to better information ecology and sense making. So there, look, everywhere you look, there's both noise and signal. You know, there's a great guy who has a lot to say on this by the name of Daniel Schmachtenberger. He has some great things to say on this, and he's done a lot of work in this space as well. In how do we, basically the question is, as a civilization, how do we collectively come together and dialogue, you know, not get confused between opinions and character? How do we sit down and actually talk to each other and chat and make sense of what's going on around us? You know, we all know, as digital natives, we all know how dirty the information ecology setup is at the moment. It's filthy. It's clogged. It's a lot of gunk in there. You know, so for you or for me to claim absolute monopoly on truth is extremely arrogant. You know, and I think there always should be a gap left open, no matter who you are, as to always say, hang on, okay, cool, let me give this gent or this lady the benefit of the doubt. Let me actually sit back, shut my mouth, and actually listen to what they're saying. You know, but now everybody is doubling down on their position, sticking their flag in quicksand, and claiming they have the full charisma of the truth. You know what I mean? They don't have the full, no one has the full charisma of the truth. No one. I believe something does, but I don't think anybody does. You know, and I think that's a huge point that we should all collectively come together and actually like, okay, cool, guys. Whoa, what's going on here? Okay, let's figure out what's that and what's that and what's that, and not just start chucking eggs at each other and shouting and trying to shout over each other. You know?
The one objection I would have to that is that once someone has declared themselves your enemy, it's very, very difficult to reach across the gap.
Fair, but the thing is, with the escalation of violence, if everybody has their own view of how things are, right? we can go on this infinite escalation of trying to outdo each other. Then what's going to happen?
Someone has to
Right?
reach across and be the bigger man at some point.
Well, forgiveness is the only thing in the universe that breaks the chain of causality, is it not?
Yes.
And our Nelson Mandela, that he showed us that.
Yeah. I mean, this is
You
one
may,
of the...
you may, like a lot of people will disagree with that, like it's in vogue now to call Mandela a sellout, but none of those people, I think, actually really appreciates the position that man was in to be able to make that call. It's actually a lot easier to give into rage and hatred and spite than to actually like really, really bite your lip and your tongue, and to kind of actually step back and say, hang on, let me put my emotions aside and actually let me think of the bigger picture. Let me think of how do we actually de-escalate these intense situations. Otherwise it's just going to be a tit for tat the whole time until they just boom, and like having such powerful weapons nowadays has kind of deadlocked that situation. But now we have other tools, other violent tools that are being deployed, and this is where I spend a lot of my time trying to understand. This is the ideological sphere, the idea sphere, the technology that propagates those various ideas. What makes those ideas propagate, and how do we put measures in place to ensure that whole information ecology and setup is done in a way that does not escalate things to a level of no return,
I mean, there's a really cheesy, for political science, it's very cheesy. There's this whole idea called the security dilemma. And generally it's applied to armies building up weapons. But what we see a lot with now is of course, now we're seeing it with actual weapons, but what we have been seeing for the past 5 years is we've been seeing people escalate rhetoric.
Yes.
And they've been, you don't know if the escalation of rhetoric represents something that's merely self-defensive or something that's aggressive. I mean, sometimes you do. For example, when you look at the EFF, it's a purely aggressive stance. But I think when a lot of people look at, for example, something like AfriForum, they see the shows of sort of macho discipline and all of that stoic, we shall not be moved attitude, and they see it as a continuity of what was initially quite an aggressive project, which is the European settlement of the rest of the world. I think it's going to be very, very difficult to shake that mental image in most people's minds, not least other white people who are desperate to find a way of distancing themselves from that heritage.
Yeah, look, I'm no security specialist, but my gut just tells me that we can't go on in the same vein. We need to sit down and talk and chat, and we can't just you can't just because you're talking to someone of a different view, you have to chat. It's imperative. It's absolutely imperative. Otherwise, you're just going to be everybody's just going to be building boogeymans in their heads of other people, projecting the worst of human nature on people that you don't even know, or people that you've just literally heard maybe a snippet, or maybe you read a tweet of theirs, or maybe you heard that they're live streaming with another individual that has diametrically opposed views to you. And then you just that's the most childish way of it's childish. That's what I can full stop. Childish. It's absolutely childish.
I think, and it's funny you say that it's childish in this context, because I think one of the big things that comes out about revolutionary worldviews is it's a promise of a world that was like what it was to be a child, where you didn't have responsibilities, where you didn't have to deal with anyone who didn't like you, you know. And
look, we're dealing with, the thing is, people don't understand, like, okay, I want to say people don't understand. I'm going to say, let me use, okay. The thing is, people are so desperately cling onto their version of reality, right? And wanting everybody to see it through their lens, you know, because that's the right way. That is how things ought to be. And the moment things don't line up, it's, oh, the world's wrong, you know. So I think there's a very adolescent energy that comes with that, you know. I think one is to pragmatically take stock of human nature throughout history, right? We tend towards violence. We tend towards some nasty things. And this is why we need to, it's very important to put measures in place, put institutions, good institutions in place that mitigate against these tendencies, because we are human, and humans generally have very nefarious desires and inclinations.
I mean, the way that someone, some of the classic English philosophers like Thomas Hobbes put it is he said that we live in a permanent state of diffidence. That is, we can never fully trust one another. There's always going to be that sort of oppositional element in society. And if you don't find a way of dealing with it, then, you know, you become consumed, either by the other person or by your own inner demons. I think one of the things that we're dealing with, I mean, like, so you know that this magazine that we're launching is aligned to some extent with Cape Independence, or shall we say we're Cape Independence friendly would be the sort of the byline that we're using.
So basically breaking away from the rest of SA.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing: if South Africa,
for me personally, I'm still struggling to reconcile that view for myself, because I find, look, I love SA, and even the idea of breaking away, it seems like a very violent prospect. There's a very violent, but not only like the potential physical violence that may be incurred, but just a spiritual, psychic violence. Of having to pull away
too.
Excuse me?
It really feels like you're tearing yourself in two pieces when you think about it, and it's not for those of us like me personally who's become convinced of my position. I know that not everyone. I know that not everyone's like this, and this is what I mean. Like I think a lot of people who are into Cape Independence will probably find me a bit sort of hot and cold, because I'll both be very aggressive in my critiques, but then at the same time insist that people be very forgiving of those who aren't for Cape Independence. And I think the reason that I confuse people like this is that most people saying goodbye to your community, saying it's as harsh as for most people dealing with a divorce of your parents or something of that nature. It's a heartbreak. The thing that gave you meaning and wholeness and a sense of home in the world becomes broken, torn apart.
Yeah, it's a very violent kind of idea. I'm not saying it like, excuse me, very hair-raising.
Yeah, and that's why I don't want to push people away who are against it. I think a lot of people look at issues of Cape Independence and they see it as very oppositional and defiant. And there's that nature to things like this, and there is a very radical edge to this. But one of the facts of nature is that we are going to continue living in a society.
Yeah.
And when, you know, people thought when South Africa came about, that would be the end of politics because everyone understood what they were going to get. And we were just like, we'll all work together and it'll all be fine. And democracy will just mean we're going to agree on everything and keep voting the same way. I have no idea how this managed to become the general zeitgeist. And I'm desperately hoping that, you know, at some point people will accept the differences between one another because they're always going to be there. People always have different interests and different ways of looking at the world.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I think advertising has such a crucial and critical role to play in this whole thing.
Yeah, you guys have a big responsibility.
No, huge, because what we're doing is we're in the marketplace of ideas, to loosely put it, right? And forming ideas and symbols in the minds of people, you know, through the work we produce and the content that gets created and the voices that get the loudspeaker, you know. So there's a huge responsibility in that whole mixing process to giving constructive to give platform to constructive voices and to constructive content. You know, it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, I feel
because you literally like advertising has the ability to terraform the whole conversation. You know, it has the ability to do that, but I think it's obviously dealing with a lot of obstacles and objectives which often are counter to your own, you know. So I think but I think by and large it's a huge tool that could be used to radically transform the whole all the talking points, you know, then shift the needle towards something that's a little bit more constructive than what it currently is.
I think it's good that we mentioned Nandos earlier, and I know that most people look at something like Nandos and say that, you know, it seems silly, you know, these are just little sketches or whatever, but they've introduced people to so many different aspects of South African culture. There's people who live in these little cultural bubbles, these ethnic bubbles. They don't always come in contact with each other, but everyone's seen a Nando's advert, right? And whether they always manage to strike exactly that perfect tone. Well, there's one exception. There's where one of the ad execs decided to insert land redistribution at some point, but that advert was just a once-off. In general, one thing that stuck out about me, because I was never it was the first time that I sort of really sort of gave a second thought to Islam as a religion was as a kid when I saw the advert of there's a fella that's the sun setting over the sea, and there's this really exhausted looking Indian fella sitting on the pier with like a Nando's chicken wing, like
waiting to break his fast.
It was like
that's brilliant.
And I was like, I get you've heard of it, but I never really like thought about it. And the thing about the humor that they use is they get you to think affectionately about all of these differences.
Yeah, and that I think that is so powerful because you know because everybody's sticking their flag in the ground and wanting to be right. Yeah. What they do in the process is negate everybody else's views and culture, you know, or in the pursuit of being right. Or being on the right side of history, you are asked to culturally surrender, you know? And I think what Nandos does particularly well is celebrating all different cultures, you know, but in a not so cheesy type of way.
No, it's really great. They don't like worship any culture. It's always they find something and unfortunate to say. And it's actually, that for me has been some of the most heartbreaking, is when part of your mind remembers all of the things that you've loved about all the different people you've shared a workspace with, you've shared a classroom with, you've shared a bed with, who are now, they're on the other side of, no man's land, and they're pointing a gun at you, metaphorically speaking. Although now it's more literal. And I think the last 5 years for me, I don't know how much it's been for you, dealing with sort of the increasing reality of fallism and the absolute ideology that they've been pushing.
See, that there's no love there, bro. There's no love and there's no mercy in that space, bro. And I know that because I was at both you and I were at UCT during its apex. Well, just as it was getting started, but it's driven by spite, my man. Yeah, dude, there's no love there, bro.
Yeah.
There's no love there.
Yeah, the thing is, it's the hurt, it's every day.
And when I say that, I'm not negating the pain and some aspects of the cause which a lot of those people in those movements fight for, but they're so possessed by getting their pound of flesh that they would, you know what I mean? They would like throw salt in the earth rather than let you see you like grow anything, and they're happy to starve. They're happy to starve with you. It's like it's like something on that level. If like it's like what's another analogy? I don't know. It's like I'm see you eating a cake and I can't have any, and I'm just gonna stuff up the cake for you as well. But I mean, I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when I give out this criticism. I'm just saying that the energy that's animating a lot of that space is animated by spite, vengeance, and hatred, and nothing good can come from that. I think people need to take stock and just chill out and just chat to other people who have diametrically opposed views to them. I know a lot of people harp on this point, but I think it's critically important, because otherwise you're just going to all live in our silos, and we'll never meet at all because you're so obsessed with getting your pound of flesh.
You are, yeah. Sherbet. I mean, that's quite
annoying, bro. That's annoying, bro.
Yeah,
it's really annoying, bro.
Yeah,
that needs to change, my man.
It does.
And anybody listening to the stream, you need to start chatting amongst yourselves and start vocalizing because I know a lot of, look, all of you guys sitting at the other end of the screen, I know a lot of you guys actually feel a bit perturbed by a lot of the rhetoric and language that's going on, a lot of the rifts that are happening, and I think y'all just need to, just don't be afraid just to voice where you stand on things, now more than ever, just to voice where you stand on things and not be afraid of any potential fallout. Speak your truth. Because people are so scared that they're going to be shunned by the cancel guard that they are all keeping still and keeping quiet. And before you know it, the needle would have shifted so far that it'll be irreversible. So chat your truth, man. Whatever color that truth may be, chat it. And then we can all get together and have a nice conversation about it. Even if it's difficult. But dude, I think it's critically important to understand how malleable and how easily how easily we can be manipulated, and how easily we can be vehicles for ideas that are animated by individuals other than ourselves.
Yeah,
That is
ideas are
critically that is critically important. That is critically important. You are not special. You are not smart enough to escape it. It's a part and parcel of our reality. That's just the way things are. And for you to even think for a second that you have 100% control over the ideas that animate your being is foolish. And I think the best way to mitigate that, right, is the best way to mitigate is first to understand that, and then second of all is to put in structures in place to make sure that you don't get taken for a ride.
You know, you're making me think of there's an Italian philosopher. He wrote a lot of stuff before when he was very, very young, and I think he killed himself at the age of 23. He came up with the most extraordinary observation. In this book he called, I first spotted it in the UCT library, and I only read a few pages and didn't really get the gist, but I stumbled across a big, like, dense think piece recently that was sent to me via over Twitter that actually dealt with this, and so I've been taking more of an interest in him. And then he's I can't remember his first name, but his surname is Michael Statter, like a German surname. It's an Italian fellow. And the book was called Rhetoric and Persuasion, and he makes this distinction between rhetoric, which is an instrumental use of language through these big ideas that then sort of dominate how you express yourself, and then persuasion, which is just a human sharing of common needs. And he describes the world as being completely dominated by language. The entire way that we organize ourselves in the modern world is dominated by language and symbols. And so how you use those ideas, it's crucially important that you approach it in a human way and do not become someone who's merely fighting with rhetoric against society, struggling against society. The idea is that you're supposed to approach it as a human being who has ordinary human needs, and saying, well, here's what I need out of society. Here's the care and attention that I need for my condition, and hoping that people will meet you halfway, you know, extending a hand and hoping someone will shake it.
Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, like, sure, it's fascinating to see. Like, you introduced me to was it BreadTube? BreadTube.
Oh, BreadTube. Oh, those silly buggers. Yes.
So maybe you want to just explain to everyone what BreadTube is.
Well, it's a group of anarcho-communists, largely, you know, wealthy Anglosphere white people, although there's also an Oxford-educated black lady who's part of it. And basically they use sort of like a childish tone and lots of flashy colors and costumes, very sort of drama club vibes, to sell communist agitprop to young kids on YouTube. And the thing is, they're very, very effective, and they've been signal boosted by a lot of people, including and including The Economist.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were the what's that? The transsexual's name? Natalie Wynn. She was ContraPoint. There we go. That's the user. She was produced by The Economist a few years ago.
So what's interesting with a lot of people in that BreadTube space is the outright framing of anybody who outside of that sphere as absurdly, like, off point. You know what I mean? So it reflects back into the absurdity of the way they craft their messages. You know what I mean? So it's almost like they think they're being clever in holding up a mirror to the absurdity, but in actual fact, it is using a particular mechanism and tool to basically create the idea that anything that falls out of that band is absurd and is ludicrous and is silly, to the point where every second sentence is an indirect joke, or
yeah, it's that sort of condescending.
Very condescending.
Be part of the in
be
group.
Part of the in group. Yeah. Ha 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 ha. Yeah.
We know
and that's, and what's also college humor. College humor falls into that space as well.
Yeah.
And the way they use the comedic that comedic mechanism, it reflects back the idea that what they are attacking is absurd and ludicrous and basically something that cannot be reasoned with. I would
I mean, it's hard because you meet some of these people occasionally, and they the less sophisticated versions of these people who are all over Twitter. And I know some of the fellows in the chat who I recognize, who are sort of part of my little the circle of Twitter that I'm in. Because Twitter can be quite a vicious place. I mean, it can be a great place to vibe with people who share the same views as you. You can share articles, you network. It can be great fun, but it also it can end up being this incredibly toxic battleground. Sorry, I don't like using the word toxic. I feel like someone else is taking charge of my vocabulary. But
yeah, there's a lot of meaning in terms of in with that attached to that now. Huh? Toxic.
I know, isn't it?
The moment you hear toxic, your brain immediately links it to various things.
Yeah, but I mean, there's an old metaphor. People talk about poisoning the well. And I think a lot of the time people desperately try and poison as much of everything as they can so that they can get an exclusive zone in which only their ideas can live. It brings back because you used the metaphor salting the fields. It's a very good one. And we had a recent problem with some old lady called Pamela Saxby. Now she actually participated in the struggle, so it's not like she doesn't have it's not like she doesn't have credentials. She doesn't have achievements under her belt. She has a career. She writes for she's written for major newspapers. I don't know if she still does. And nevertheless, she spent huge amounts of her free time going after tiny little accounts on Twitter and trying to antagonize them and get them banned and block them. And she put up this website where she was like blacklisting a whole bunch of Twitter accounts and hoping to find out where they live and who they are, and like open targeted harassment. And you sort of think, well, who are you at this stage of your life that you're doing this? What kind of person behaves that way? What kind of what possesses you?
Yeah. Well, we're living in two worlds now, dude. We're living in two worlds simultaneously, and I think. Look, you watched that Netflix documentary everybody's talking about now. What's it called now? Oh, just gone blank. The Social Dilemma.
What's
the Social Dilemma? The Social Dilemma.
Okay, what's the premise?
Well, it's based on a whole lot of ex-social media execs and top dogs, basically just highlighting the toxic nature of social media and its adverse effects on the human, and which they aren't wrong for sure, but I think it was very much the discussion remained at how the way these technologies have been designed is basically to hoard your attention and how through that mechanism of hoarding your attention, they have so many adverse externalities and negative effects, you know, whether it's depression, whether it's creating a bigger rift between the right and the left, all of those things. But I think there's an important aspect to that conversation which wasn't broached, or wasn't, not many people are talking about it, and that's the idea of our sense of community has changed dramatically through the advent of these electronic mediums, radio, television, and then obviously digital media. So Marshall McLuhan touches on this quite extensively, and he passed away in 1980, and that was just at the beginning of the introduction to the personal computer. So only after his death really did a lot of his work actually crystallize. So you had a lot of his media theories, which were actually seen to be like very far out there and very like, oh, what are you even talking about, man? To like right now in this present day and age, like, dude, this guy's a prophet, man. Like everything he's saying is so apt, you know.
The bifurcation, the atomization of people tied who connect across the world but can't connect to their families.
Yes. So, but like, but with that, what's created is a situation where you have a different sense of community, a different idea of community, right? Like we haven't really evolved much since a couple of thousand years ago, right? So we are only interacting with a set amount of people every day in our lifetime, right? Views and stuff. So with that augmentation due to this technology, right? I'm chatting to you, and then there's other people plugged into the stream, and these people are going to be watching the stream later on as well. After this, I can log off, and then I can go interact with other people on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. The sense of community is it's gone from like this to like infinite, or as many people as there are online, basically, you know. So with that, our reference points have also changed, right? Because as humans, we're always measuring ourselves up against something to make sense of the world, you know, and that's often done in relation to other people naturally, you know. I measure to understand where I'm at in my life. I'm obviously going to compare myself to other people to make sure where I am in time and space, right? But now that has been expanded to a point where we're still trying to make sense of it. We're still trying to, like, you know, equalize, you know. So that is exceptionally that's an exceptionally interesting thing to look at, our sense of community and the reference points which we choose to incorporate when we make sense of ourselves in relation to the world.
You know, it's funny you say that, because I saw recently an episode of, oh, what's that thing called? It has it's a British thing. It's called Doc Martin, and it's about this doctor who lives down by a small seaside town, and he's a bit of a prick, and he doesn't get along well with people, and he rubs all of these small town people the wrong way. And it's before like that really like internet saturated era, and it's before diversity quotas. So it's this tiny little white English town where everybody talks like that. Everybody knows everybody else, and it's all very sort of like cutesy, and he's this sort of like very bitter city urban prick. But he's in the middle of this town, and he was having at the end of this one episode, after they wind up whatever the silly dispute is for the episode. There's a dispute between a father and son, and the father's a plumber, and the son is into computers, and he was confiding in the doctor how much he wished his son would follow him, and then they could be a father and son team of plumbers and aspire to inventing their own like washers or like weird little things like that. And I thought to myself, like, it's a really beautiful dream that is just within reach, and it's the kind of dreams that you hear about when you watch old films or you read old books, is what people aspired to was within their reach. They weren't competing against Elon Musk. They weren't competing against the King of England or Charlemagne or Napoleon. They were competing against almost themselves and their community and little else. And so you didn't die under the crushing weight of the eternity of human aspiration. You live in a human realm, and it's been completely.
And that's why there's so much. That's why I even say there's so much jealousy towards the elites. You know, I find this crazy.
You see how
excuse me?
Because you can see how they live. You watch whatever, and people in their fat houses with their Lamborghini.
A lot of people, like, what I find is this interesting thing that I've picked up. It's like people will berate and hate on the elites, but like simultaneously try and get to where they are.
Yeah, envy.
It's a weird situation, you know, like, oh, so bougie, you know, look at my grand post, I'm living my best life. And then simultaneously, oh, no, done with the elites, you know, it's like in the same breath. And I'm like, oh, what's that about? You know, that's an interesting feature of the world at the moment.
Yeah, there's a whole discussion about how recently, in the last couple of generations or so, crime rates have matched up with inequality. And you sort of, why that is the case is, it's very, very difficult. People don't really have a great explanation, but the one that's persuasive to me is that the differences are more visible. People can be happy when they're poor as long as they can't see other people being rich.
Yeah.
And it used to be that there were like a whole bunch of taboos against showing off your wealth. And you if you've ever met anyone who's from like old money, like when I say old money, I don't mean like the Americans have old money. I mean like the British have old money.
Yeah, I understand.
They're very down to earth, and they don't dress ostentatiously, and they don't flash.
You know why? You know why? Because people who are used to things don't shout; they whisper.
Yes, and but there's the whole thing of it. It's actually considered very crass to show off. I think that all of that's changing now, and we're living in a world where everyone's shouting as hard as they can. Look at me! Look how well I'm doing. And I've seen in South Africa how hard all of those leaders flash their Gucci and everything, and the white commentators will all go, "Ha! Look at the hypocrisy! Look how they're living." Whereas you talk to an ordinary black guy, and he says, "Yes, but he's made it."
Yeah.
You know,
it's a symbol. It's always been a symbol of you know, it's a very important symbol, you know, because you have to also understand, like coming from a history of not having for like the longest time and being deprived of so much. You never wanted to be seen as poor. You could be poor, but it's important not to be seen as poor because that's not dignified.
Yeah.
You know, so that has translated into what we see now, where a lot more people are coming into some money now. So, you know, it's very much still a dignity type of thing because they had such long periods of being without, you know. So, yeah.
It's something that I remember Mark Lottering playing up a lot. Was the aspirational Tanny, who's always very serious about like what kind of dishcloths she has and what kind of tablecloths she has. And it's almost like this very sort of depressed. You see a little bit of it in white middle class society, but the signals are all different. But it's a whole thing of people sort of like desperately competing to keep their head above the social watermark.
Yes.
It's so
Yes.
petty. And yet, to some degree, you have to be able to play that game, or you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, it's yeah, a lot of the time it's quite sad to see, you know,
That's
because
food for you,
isn't it? Yeah, because it's underlying that is a lot of insecurity, and sadly, a lot of marketers in the past have played on that insecurity, highlighting your insecurity, and then offering you the solution to that. That's been the general formula for a long time, but people are seeing through that now. You know, a lot of the best content don't play by those rules these days. A lot of the best content is content and campaigns that really kind of, you know, give you energy, man, uplift you, give you something to really put wind in your sails. You know, I think that's the content that really floats.
I've noticed the best. I don't know if you had the same experience, because both of us are old enough to remember a time before the internet was everywhere. And almost all of us had this picture of like advertising and movies and everything, where a lot of it was driven in that very cynical way. You find the internet and you find a whole bunch of people into things just genuinely. And I was a huge fan of like punk music when I was a kid, because it felt like you could feel that the people really meant what they were doing. You know? When you listen to the radio,
authenticity to it.
Yeah. So people are
wasn't plastic. Wasn't plastic. Yeah. People are people are also looking for things that reflect their reality, that reflect themselves. People are always searching for themselves in other people or in things or in the media that they consume, right? So and that's why I think it's so important to be able to accurately and effectively be able to reflect that and not import American ideas and stuff into our space here in SA. You know, let's start generating our own stuff through putting our own people on, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of that
giving them platforms.
I think
it takes time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that will require people who have the time, looking back to their roots and looking back to their parents' memories and looking at what makes their neighborhood special, what makes their own crowd special, their heritage, which we've forgotten so much about, because we're all being told.
It's like an amnesia, but the whole world's going through an amnesia, bro. Like literally the whole world, we slowly being eroded away and being replaced by this very low resolution idea of how things ought to be. You know, we slowly forgetting about things that came before, because you know things that came before is, you know, not woke, or it's
like
backward or
black and white, literally. Very literally. For our generation, you're black or you're white. And like everything is measured by what your loyalties are in respect to that. And it's a horrible tragedy, because everything in between the other colors just get absorbed.
Yeah. And the thing with SA is, like, in our desperation to create this new South Africa, we've kind of been very hectic in terms of trying so desperately to forget the past, that we're trying to we're severing all ties to what we had before, you know, trying to create this new rainbow nation, and asking people to culturally surrender to this new South Africa. It's only going to bring violence.
Yeah, because you take away everything from a man except for his identity, and then of course he's going to fight, you know.
Yeah,
Because I mean, if you're living for your community, if you're living for something that you've got to protect, to defend, then there's a limit to how much you're willing to clash with others, because war has a cost. But if all you have is your identity, then there isn't any of that fragile beauty to lose anymore, is there?
Yeah, I mean, we need to, like, my personal thing is we need to start looking back into the past and seeing what stuff we can use, you know, right now. I think there's a lot of gold that we can dust off and kind of fix into the way we make sense of the world going forward. And that's why, and that's one of the things that I don't enjoy about this this woke vibe, is their total arrogance and disregard for tradition.
Yeah. I remember you telling me the other day how you got so much out of Bishop's College.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they had
dude.
they had that whole thing of the tradition.
Oh yeah, dude, tradition is steep there. It's what keeps you grounded and centered. Every morning throughout my entire career there, we went to chapel. We spent at least 30 minutes in chapel every morning from Monday to Friday, you know, and, you know, you're not going to feel like it. Most of the time you didn't feel like it. It was a lust. You didn't want to go. It's a mission. And most of the time you were switched off thinking about other stuff, you know. But the discipline of sitting there and all being fixed towards a common thing, it kind of does something to you, man. It does something to you. And I think like, I remember when I first got in grade 8, like, we weren't allowed to walk on the grass, you know, like only matrics were allowed to walk on the grass, you know. And like, oh, what the hell is this? Like, so stupid. I mean, so wanky, you know, why can't we walk on the grass, you know? But it was instilling into you that you have to wait and earn your stripes. You know,
Yeah.
you can't just pitch up and claim ownership of certain things. No, you must wait your turn. And I think there's a special lesson in that, which I think a lot of today's world that doesn't really appreciate, and it shows. You know, I think, yeah, there's just the discipline of sitting in chapel every day when you didn't feel like it. The discipline of understanding where on the hierarchy, on the food chain you were. Those are very, very important. Those are very important aspects which kind of mirror how life is, you know. And a lot of people will say, oh no, all of those things are man-made. All of those structures are man-made to impose its tyranny on you and to subjugate you to its woeful forces. But the fact remains is that hierarchies form naturally in nature, you know. So when hierarchies form naturally in nature and generally in society, power and prestige would often follow those lines, you know. So how do we put in place systems, right, and structures to facilitate that without it getting out of hand?
Hierarchies as opposed to unfair hierarchies.
Yeah. Yes. Because when I was an anarchist back in the day, in my idealistic young mentality, you know, very arrogant, very adolescent in nature, it was, oh no, we gotta destroy the hierarchy. We gotta have a horizontal leadership structure where there's no real leaders, right? But that is susceptible to even more bullshit, because what you have is power naturally centering around people who are the loudest.
I remember this. We saw that experiment live.
Yes, we saw it live. We were in those meetings in the form. I remember I was in Leslie social, just after one of the, like, it was the second big, it was like in the early days, like literally in the same week that the shit got thrown on the statue. where they were coming up with the name for this
the
thing. Or
hashtag just got started.
The hashtag just got started. Fees must, not fees must fall, roads must fall. They were like still in the formulating phase. But we saw it there as well. There were no leadership structures, but when you don't have those, when you have horizontal leadership structures, power forms even more asymmetrically. You know what I mean?
It rotates so much faster, because anyone who utters the most emotionally salient thing immediately becomes the new leader for that moment.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a competition for who can be the most radical and who can be the most aggressive.
So it's all
things move so quickly.
It's a chase to the end, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the first time that I heard. Yeah, I still remember the first time I heard Lazi Lushaba speak was at one of those, and he said that any of the lecturers who do not stand with the movement, we will find you, and we will deal with you when this is over.
So you know what bullshit is that? That is just not on. How can you threaten people like that? You see, then people start becoming afraid of expressing their true ideas and their thoughts. So then
the point.
Dialogue gets cut out of the equation completely.
Yeah. I mean, like, they're pushing all of these like old lecturers into retirement so that they can make way for radicals. Like in the the one person who was like a serious economic historian was replaced by a Marxist from India. Like,
yeah, those are very unfortunate situations. But I think just by virtue of us having a conversation like this, hopefully more conversations will be spawned in the public sphere.
Yeah, well, we've got some quality fellas in the chat here, like Unati Clarissa over here, and Conscious Carol Adams from Sale.
Oh, where?
Sound fellas who are interested in getting like a humane conversation together. And speaking of the chat, there was one question for us, which unfortunately I'm going to have to politely shoot down. So Papa Alpaca says, hey guys, can you discuss the involvement of young adults as a driving force for Cape independence? And I'll just say here that Liam isn't pro Cape independence. He's still very much a South African fella. And I'm not here to only this isn't just for clarity for anyone who's wondering. Just because I feel that the time has come for Cape independence doesn't mean that I'm here to only bring on people who agree with me. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you there.
Are there any other questions?
No. There's mostly just been sort of happy banter. So
cool. Look, I wouldn't say I'm diametrically opposed to the idea, but I mean, I'm just struggling to reconcile it for myself at the moment. Yeah, I'm neither for or against it. Maybe that's a bit of a weak position to take, but yeah, it's look, if things really do go sideways in this country, then maybe. But I'm like, I don't know if you guys ever watched the anime Naruto.
Oh, you're talking about the original series or Shippuden? Because I haven't seen Shippuden, but one
both.
I had a very.
I know you're probably in a bad mood when you watched it, bro. But
dude, I hated
like
it so much.
When it comes to these things.
Yeah, I was locked into. I was at the medical res because it was on a holiday and I had to stay somewhere for the holiday period, and I was stuck in the medical res and I didn't have
that's
a lot.
Probably why you didn't enjoy it.
I didn't have spare cash to spend, and like I was just chilling there, and nothing else to watch.
Dude. Yeah. No, dude. Like, well, when it comes to, look, I'm always a hopeful dude. I'm always on the side of positivity, and before I even think of seceding, as a country, I want to make things reg, bro. And I think we should all first look. A lot of people have already made their own conclusions as to where things are going, and already putting their efforts into wanting to secede. But for me, SA, brother, all the way. But
you want to exhaust all options before you say goodbye.
We haven't even begun to exhaust all the options, bro. Like, come on, man. You know what I mean? Like, I honestly think there's still room for us to maneuver and be smart about things. It's far from over, bruh. It's far from over. There's still lots of hope, and there's still lots of love to be shared, and mercy to be shown from all sides. And I think we shouldn't let go of that so easily and so quickly out of fear. And I think, yeah, that's my position. So look, to be honest, I'm much rather, no, I didn't rather not say it. But yeah, I'd much rather maybe go down with the ship than see, you know, like it's do or die, bro. Like I'm not gonna just sit back and keep my mouth shut and watch these whiny small group of adolescents shouting about inequality and how hard life is. To drive the conversation, you know, because that's not everything that we are. We're much more than that, you know. That is something, and it's something to acknowledge. Life has been exceptionally hard for some people, yes, but that's not all who we are, you know. And that's, I think, the fatal mistake of a lot of this woke politics. It does, it traps you in this mindset that
zero sum.
Yeah, traps zero sum, but also that you are a slave and nothing more.
It doesn't allow you any dignity.
Doesn't.
When your life isn't going perfectly.
Or you tie up your dignity to the destruction of another group. And that's the only way you can recapture your dignity is through the destruction of another group. But we need to transcend that by not looking at things at like zeros and ones and so dichotomous. We need to be able to transcend that, and it takes a little bit of creativity to be able to kind of think about how we ought to position ourselves. Because I look, as a man of color, you're always told that well, the God, the woke God is a very jealous God. The woke God always keeps on repeatedly telling you that you are, as for this is the way I interpret it as a person of color, that you are you come from brokenness, and the only way to recapture your dignity is through the putting down of others and the destroying of others, you know. But for me, moving from that base, it traps you into this victim mentality, you know. Yeah, that's my position on that kind of stuff. I'm probably not articulated in the best way possible right now, but I mean,
but you've articulated things that I recognize from a lot of the stuff I read. For example, Eric Hoffer actually articulated that quite well. He's I don't know if he's German or American, but anyway, he always talked about how the movement, whatever it is, will make you sacrifice yourself and your free will to serve its ends. Yes.
Yeah, it will do that. And I'm not negating like, look, about like my ancestors, my family, my kin, so to speak, have endured excessive amounts of pain and hardship. And the reverberations of that pain and hardship still echoes in my life today, you know, through that generational, you know, you can't deny that. It's not negating that. But the thing is, to view yourself as that only is where I take issue with.
Yeah,
because now you're disempowering yourself. Because then you're always looking at yourself as a victim, you know, in relation to the world, and always as like some underdog that needs to shout for someone else's approval. It's like you say, it's like you're standing at the table of the white man, are begging to be seen. I mean, what the hell is that about?
Please you build your own table.
Yeah, or please apologize, and you just apologize now. Yeah, like, bugger that, man. Move on and get on with your life. You know?
Yeah.
Like, it's absurd. And you're stuck in this loop. Please see me, please see me. Please say sorry, please say sorry. Look, the honest truth is a lot of people aren't going to see you, never will see you, and never going to say sorry. So get over yourself, man. You know, get over yourself and just get on with it. That's the long and short. You know, and I think it takes a lot of look, this is how I feel now. My views may change in 6 months or 12 months. This is how I feel now. And I think it's important for me to express this right now, because I'm sure maybe one or two other people, they feel the same way. But I think it's now just to really just to take hold of ourselves and to look at the world practically and pragmatically, and to really try to quickly understand how we ought to chart the way forward, because the reality of the situation is that things are becoming extremely polarized to the point where you're willing to basically spite your own children's future just so that you can have your pound of flesh. You know, we have to be really creative and very careful with the way we frame things going forward. And that comes from all aspects of society, no matter where you are, you know. Yeah.
So making meaning and meaning well.
Yeah, dude. And also really collectively working together to make better sense of the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And actively engage with views that are diametrically opposed to your own, because it's a muscle that you're exercising. You know, and if at any point, I realized, if at any point you get super emotionally charged about a particular thing, then you may have been captured by ideology.
Yeah, don't let another man define your world, you know.
Your emotional state. You're giving your power away for things external to yourself to influence your emotional state. And you go to bed angry. You eat breakfast in a huff. You know? So it's important for people to really understand where their ideas are coming from, and what's occupying occupying one's mind, and where those ideas originate from. Because I think that's important. I think people ought to meditate on that very carefully, because more so than often, I find sometimes I get wrapped up in certain emotional charges, or I'm obsessing about something that I read or learned, and dude, I'm like, I would just be going about my day, and then all of a sudden my mind's taken there. I'm just like, oh, and it changes my whole emotional state. And I'm like,
yeah, someone else is gripping the steering wheel.
Exactly. So yeah, dude, it's we should all just meditate on where our ideas come from, and take stock and really
how to
understand
grab hold of our own steering wheels.
Yeah. No,
yeah,
100%.
and on that note, since we're nearing the 2-hour mark, I think we can call that a very productive discussion.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Well, for everyone listening, good night, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Tomorrow we are going to be on with we're going to be on with Russell Lamberti, and he's going to lead us with a bit of a tour of Mugabenomics and what they mean for South Africa. So if you're interested in that, you can tune in at 1:00 tomorrow. So good night. Stay safe.
Peace. Cheers, guys.